Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm wwII, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about the introduction of the multiple weapons system into the World War II game mode. So recently the multiple weapons system became a thing in the Cold War game mode, and now that it's made its way into World War II, I'm going to be talking about two of the tanks in the first batch to receive secondary guns or secondary armaments. And the two tanks in question are two of the most infamous tanks in World War II, the super heavy German Tier 10 tanks, the MAUS and the E100. So coming up first, I have two replays for you in the MAUS, as someone is looking at my Krampus skin there in the background, and then I have two replays for you in the E100. Both have the same 75mm gun, or I should say both have a 75mm gun, but they do vary in a few small ways that you might not notice if you haven't read the update notes that were a couple of weeks ago, or if you haven't really been paying attention. So I'm going to go over the details of both of the 75mm guns, and then I will talk you through how effective these guns are in the game, whether they're more of a hindrance than a help, because you have to think about more than one thing at once, and for me, I'm sure I struggle to do that some of the time, or most of the time I should say. So yeah, I'll be talking about that, how effective it can be in the gameplay, but also how it can get you out of some sticky situations. So up on the screen now, I'll put some information for you on the multiple weapon system that Wargaming released in a news article, and I'll also put up the details and the statistics of the MAUS's 75mm gun then. So this 75mm gun you access the same way that you would in Cold War. You would access a secondary gun there, or an ATGM, by holding down the A button on Xbox or the X button on PlayStation. It's the simplest way to do it. However, you can choose to sort of map that however you wish. I just find that it sort of becomes second nature for me to hold down the A button. Have it in World War II and Cold War mode is the same, and then I don't forget which buttons to press. So when you get this 75mm gun, you get a gun that deals 110 alpha damage with its standard AP rounds, 110 alpha damage with its premium APCR rounds, and 175 alpha damage with its HE rounds. And you might be thinking that's a pretty nice addition, because this DPM is a base of 1466.3 extra DPM onto the top of the MAUS's 128mm, which is a nice addition. However, the penetration is absolutely god-awful, and that's the same for the MAUS's 75mm gun and the E100's 75mm gun. So brace yourselves for this terribly low penetration. So the MAUS has a penetration on the AP rounds of 94mm, on the APCR at 130mm, and on the HE it is a lowly 38mm of penetration. And yeah, you're not going to be going through much with that. But as Wargaming have stated in their news article, it's kind of intended for shooting lightly armoured tanks, some lightly armoured artillery, shooting down trees, buildings, that kind of thing, destructible objects, and helping you in that way. The shell velocity on these rounds with the AP, it's 740 meters a second. However, it's a quite nice 925 meters a second on the APCR, and it's 740 meters a second on the HE. So it's not awful, it's not as bad as the E100 75mm, which we'll go over in a second. But in the gameplay in the background, you are seeing the first kind of opportunity that we've had to really sort of make use of this secondary armament, where we get a few shots into the turret of the FE 4005, and you could penetrate that with pretty much anything that you could lay your hands on. If you threw a blade of grass at it, you'd be you'd have a good chance of penetrating the FE 4005's turret. So there it added a bit of DPM, helped us to get rid of that tank quicker, as he shot into my tracks and did 0 damage, which is always really pleasant when you're driving a super heavy tank and one of those rounds doesn't actually do any damage. So with my commander and equipment set up, which I will put up at the end of the video for you to have a look at my super heavy setup, I now have DPM with this 75mm on the MAUS of 1967, so that's extra damage if you're able to penetrate, and it's just extra damage that you can put out, and you can switch to that instantly from your main armament, your 128mm gun, and yeah, you can get firing. But that penetration does hold you back. It means that you are not going to be as effective at shooting tanks as you would wish. The lightly armoured tanks, like light tanks, tank destroyers with paper thin armour, you can go through quite easily, but you do have to do multiple shots to damage tracks on tanks if you wish to use the gun in that way. So that brings to an end the first game there, where we finish with a high caliber. That's 4,748 direct damage, 1,122 assistance, and we get 3 kills. So we're going to head on now into the second gameplay with the MAUS and talk more about this 75mm secondary gun. And we're in the second replay of today's video. We're here with the MAUS on Hidden Village, and on Hidden Village in the MAUS, most people would go to the first fighting corridor, which is the westernmost sort of line that heads into the one line on the map. There is this little middle section that you can contest the hill at, and there's also the little hidden village, hence the name, into the northeast of the map. So I'm kind of going over this open part of ground at the start, hoping I might get a few shots at tanks that peek in that ridgeline ahead of me, and then I'm going to make my way up to a defensive location, sort of in the central part of the map. Use some hard cover to avoid the artillery, because on a MAUS, in a MAUS I should say, on this map, you are basically going to be target number 1 because it's so open. And there comes the first shell, so we're going to try and get a couple shells in, or at least have a chance to. And I'm going forward here, and then I'm going to reverse up the slope to stop any tanks that might be wanting to shoot me that have head into the little hidden village there, and we block 390 damage straight off the bat. So in this replay in particular, we're going to see if we can make more use of the 75mm secondary gun, and in particular we're going to see if we can use it to track our opponents more. So briefly, I spoke at the end of the last gameplay about using the secondary guns with the tanks that have this multiple weapon system to track your opponents, and that's a really good move. It's going to get you some more assistance, and it's going to keep them in place for you as well, and to stop them running rings around you, especially if you're in a slow lumbering heavy like the MAUS or like the E100. However, the low caliber round means that the low caliber gun, I should say, means that you are going to have to fire multiple rounds in order to track your opponents, and that's even with tanks that don't have much track health. So if you're firing at sort of heavies and super heavies, you're pretty much hardly ever going to get their tracks off unless you are continuously firing for sort of half a minute. But you might come across a medium or a light, shoot them sort of multiple times and get their tracks off, and when they haven't got a repair kit, with this rate of fire you can keep them tracked, because it only takes 1 hit point's worth of damage to keep a tracked tank in place. So bear that in mind. If you know someone's used their repair kit and they're stuck in place, switch to your secondary gun. Just keep them there, even if you're not doing any sort of damage to them. You are doing track damage, and you should be able to keep them in place, and you can keep them alternating between your main gun and your secondary gun, get the assistance and get the raw damage as well. So you're also seeing me here at the start of today's battle on Hidden Village, just shooting some of the hard cover into the northeast of the map. We're also making use to get a shot into the back of that Progetto 65 as he runs away, and the reason I'm shooting down some of the hard cover is basically to improve the chance of spotting tanks that are going to be coming from the north, from the northeast, back to where my artillery is hiding. So I'm hoping to be able to spot them as they try and flank us. And that's just something that I'm doing in preparation for sort of a later game scenario. Here you're seeing the penetration problems. I'm shooting this sort of side of this 50B's turret here. We think we got one in earlier to the side of the tank, but that turret, even from this sort of distance, it's going to be a sort of 50-50 whether we're going to actually penetrate. Even firing the APCR with the 75mm gun. Another thing to sort of shoot at are modules with the 75mm gun. If you know that there's a damaged module on a tank, maybe a fuel tank, keep shooting with the 75mm, keep aiming for it, and yeah, there's a good chance that you're going to set the tank on fire or damage the module again should they repair it if you keep firing in the same location. So that's a really good tactic to use. And I've already set a few tanks on fire with this puny little 75mm gun, and it is quite funny when you do so. And it's also very nice that they think you've fired and you've actually only fired your secondary gun, and you still have a 128mm armament ready to go, and you can put 490 alpha damage into them. So here on Hidden Village, we're sat in this defensive location. We are just trying to spot the crosshair towards the sort of south east of the map, and we're going to try and get some shells with the 75mm into the back of this M46, and we're actually getting a few shells into him there, so that's improving our damage total just that little bit more. And we've already picked up 3.7k damage. We've blocked just shy of 6,000 damage, and we've got 1,253 assistance, so it hasn't been that bad of a game in the MAUS. There's an argument to say that I should have gone down the first sort of fighting corridor in around the F4 location. However, I just knew that I'd get blasted by artillery, and yeah, I think that this was probably a better decision to try and keep tanks from flanking us, trying to get the artillery. However, there were just too many for me at that time, because the 128mm gun on this tank doesn't have the best DPM, and even with two guns, I wasn't able to sort of hold off this position for too long. We're still going, we've still got sort of half our hit points left. You have 3,000 in the MAUS, so that's always nice. So we're going to try and take this one down. It's a very even game. It's exactly even. It's 5 tanks versus 5, and I'm always wary of trying to move from this location at this point, because there is an enemy artillery in play, and if they didn't have an artillery, if one of the mediums went and destroyed the artillery, I'd feel much more comfortable. I'd be able to trade effectively with this gun, and with the multiple weapon system, it would mean that I'm able to switch between the guns, keep tanks in place, and do extra damage. But I'm hoping this 60 TP now falls back. I've asked him to sort of fall back, try and bring this enemy around the rock so we can get a shot into him. But now I kind of feel like I'm losing the game, so I'm in an iron whether to go this under the Giants crossing the open field, so we get a nice shot into the side of his tank. And now we're just going to be trying to get some shots in with this secondary gun, and this is the kind of moment when it can be useful to destroy the buildings for me and also for my friendly tanks. However, you can also get lulled into a position where you're just firing constantly with your secondary gun, doing no damage. You're giving away your position, and yeah, it can be detrimental to your game. It can mean that you're not angling because you have to aim the gun as well, and that does bring me on to another big point about the secondary guns, especially with the World War II secondary guns, is that the reticle, when you go into sniper mode, is slightly offset. The offset reticle is the one that you're meant to be aiming with. It can be really off-putting, and you can be trying to sort of fire in sniper mode, missing your shells and wondering why, and realise that you aren't aiming exactly where you're meant to be. So when you go to sniper mode, you have your regular reticle for your main gun, and for the secondary gun it will be a slightly offset reticle, and you do have to fire that way. And that sort of caught me out a little bit. It did look a bit weird, and I wonder what was going on, whether it was a bug, but that will be being looked at by Wargaming, and hopefully they'll make some improvements to that in the coming updates. So in particular in this game now, it's 3 versus 2. It's a light tank and an artillery versus me, a medium, and another heavy. So it's looking like it should be in our favour, and I'm trying to advance from rock to rock to make sure that if I do get spotted, artillery has less of a shell arc to hit me. There is a Sheridan somewhere, and I'm just hoping I don't get spotted at this cross, but unfortunately I do. The Sheridan's in a relatively good place there. So we're going to go right against this rock and just hope that the artillery, who usually like to sit in the sort of B2, A2 location, doesn't manage to land a shell on my massive fat tank with the Krampus skin. I'm just hoping that this medium can go forward and kill that artillery, because that would not definitely win the game for us, but it would mean that it's a hell of a lot more likely. So we come around this corner and see that our poor tank's got Armour there. We kick his turret out the way in typical super heavy German fashion, and now we're going to go forward and try and sort of create a pincer manoeuvre on this artillery. And I'm hoping this light tank has actually gone back to help his artillery out. It would appear not, though, as we get spotted as we're coming out. I noticed that this artillery is looking at us, which isn't great, unfortunately for us. he misses us. We should have just backed up there behind the rock, but I was hoping that our medium tank would be able to shoot him in the side. However, he gets shut down by the Sheridan, and that Sheridan's got much better camo than me. He'll be able to outsmart me any day of the week. And what I'm doing here is reversing up to this rock so artillery doesn't have a shot at me, and it's only the Sheridan that can shoot me. He has rounds that are capable of penetrating my tank with the heat rounds that he carries with the 105mm gun, and I'm just hoping that this Type 5 Heavy can sort of flank around and get shots into this Sheridan. I'm trying to let him know where the Sheridan is. I'm trying to get this Type 5 to help me, and if I can just wiggle, angle, try and hold off using my 1000 hit points, hopefully I will be able to take this one down with the Type 5. And once that Sheridan spotted, I was hoping that he'd go after the Type 5 and I can go off now and take out the artillery. However, the artillery is just in a slightly awkward location there. Unfortunately, we're firing the secondary gun. I thought that I was firing my main gun. I've done that a few times. That's another bad side to this multiple weapon system. If you're not careful, you can accidentally fire the wrong gun, and it can cause you some real harm. And in a minute you're going to see what kind of harm it causes me. So we've now put the artillery onto a one shot. I've switched to my main 128mm gun. I'm advancing behind the hard cover, so I'm hoping that the artillery doesn't get a shot into me. I feel like I've just got to go now as the Sheridan's fighting my Type 5 Heavy. We're going to try and go to this ridgeline and get a shot into the top of his turret. I want to make sure I kill him in one shot, but I want to try and do it as quick as possible, meaning that I don't get splashed by this WwII. I hated this artillery when I was playing it. I was hoping that he'd just fire one over with the shell arc. Unfortunately, he splashes us and the Sheridan takes us down there. That was a little bit of bad play by me, but you live and you learn, and we still had a relatively decent game nonetheless, and we managed to make a little bit of use of the 75mm secondary gun. So we picked up 4 kills in that game. We got 5.7k direct damage, 1537 assistance, finished top of our team, but probably let our team down there at the end. And now we're going to head on into 2 games with the E100 and see how that 75mm gun compares. So we're back on Hidden Village, and this time we are in the E100, which was one of my first tier 10 tanks and one of the first tanks that I 3-marked. I absolutely love this tank, so it will be interesting to see whether I think the E100 75mm gun is better than the MAUS's, or is comparable, or is worse, and whether I think in general the concept of multiple weapon systems or secondary guns on vehicles like this are kind of pointless or more of a hindrance than a help. I'll put up the details of the E100's secondary gun for you now, and I'll talk you through my opinions on that. So you'll see that the alpha damage is the same as the MAUS's 75mm gun, however you do have some differences. The penetration is much worse on the E100 75mm gun. With the standard rounds it's 43mm of penetration. With the premium rounds, which are heat compared to the MAUS's APCR, it's 87mm of penetration, and it's 38mm of penetration on the HE, which is the same as the MAUS. The other major drawback to the E100 75mm rounds is the shell velocity. It's 385 meters a second on the AP and HE rounds, and only 308 meters a second on the heat. So at mid to long ranges, any of the rounds are incredibly hard to hit unless they are stationary, and it just loops up in the air like a derp gun, and it's really hard to actually hit tanks to do sort of damage to them. It's more for stationary tanks at sort of mid to long ranges, knocking down buildings, and for up close it's better for keeping tanks tracked, and you are able to hit them for damage if they don't have any armor at all much more reliably, because you have a better DPM of 2151.6, and if you use my commander and equipment setup, you can get the DPM of the E100's 75mm up to 2.8k, and I'll tell you my commander and equipment setup in the next gameplay. So all in all, with those statistics of the E100 75mm gun, and I think you can tell that it's basically just a worse secondary gun. It's harder to use, and it's more frustrating in terms of the penetration. There are tanks that you'd think, you know, you should be able to penetrate that don't have any armor at all, and somehow you'll bounce off a really weird angle on paper thin armour, and it's just frustrating. Of course, like Wargamer said, it's not meant for sort of soul damage, it's for knocking down destructible objects, it's for keeping tracks off. And for keeping tracks off, the E100's 75mm gun is slightly better due to that higher rate of fire. And if you do catch out a tank that has paper thin armour and you are penetrating every round, you are able to do a substantial amount of extra damage with the E100 compared to the MAUS. But for general use, I'd say the MAUS's secondary gun is more useful. All in all, do I think that the multiple weapon system is a useful addition to these tanks? I think in certain scenarios it can be, if you use your head and play it smart and don't get lulled into just shooting it for the sake of it. You can use it in situations to get an advantage, like I said, for the tracks, for lightly armoured vehicles and for knocking down buildings. However, for the most part, I think they're just going to be a distraction for players. It can distract you from angling your armour, which is especially useful in the E100 on the MAUS. That's kind of your speciality, is your armour, isn't it? And you want to be able to angle your turret, angle your hull, and if you're thinking about a secondary gun as well as your main gun, it can be really frustrating. So I think for the general player, maybe it's just going to be more of a hindrance. For the sort of top players, I don't really include myself in that bracket, and for players that sometimes have a moment of genius, it can be useful. But for the most part, it's more of a hindrance and kind of annoying. Having said that, if you find yourself in front of one of these and you know that it's got a secondary gun, put it that way, and you don't want to sit out in front of it once they fired their main gun off. I've seen quite a lot of people seeing that I fire my secondary gun, thinking I fired my main gun. They come forward and they get shot by my main gun, and yeah, it can sort of distract you that way. That's why it's always good to read the sort of update notes and things like that, so you're aware of the changes to the tanks, even if you're not necessarily interested in the main content of the update. Things like that, like this, can come through and surprise you, and you can get taken out. And we've taken a few tanks out already in today's video, with the addition of a few shells from the secondary guns, and you'll see it throughout this replay, and in particular the end of the next replay, where it actually comes in handy quite a bit. So in terms of this game then, with the E100, we've used it a little bit to get some extra damage, and you're seeing it here. I'm firing at this Waffle Panzer IV, I'm getting some extra damage in here, and it just means that when I do get the chance to fire with my main gun, it's on a low enough hit points that I'm able to take out with one shot. We've blocked 1700 damage in this game, we've picked up 3.7k direct damage and got 566 assistance, and this is a tank that just seems to work for me. And yeah, I think that I could probably still do a roughly similar game than I'm getting in today's replays for you with the E100 and the MAUS. However, there are chances where I could have used the secondary guns better, and it probably has boosted my raw damage ever so slightly by, you know, a few hundred to 500 damage. So it can be useful for things like that if you're chasing marks of excellence, etc. As we fire our final shell into the rear of the MAUS there, that was reversed up against that rock, and we take that one down, finishing in MVP slot with 4.3k direct damage, 566 assistance, and we get 2 kills. So we're gonna go straight into the fourth and final gameplay for you today in today's video, and I'll talk you through how I use the secondary gun in that replay. So we're now on Kasserine in the E100, and this is the fourth and final replay of today's video. And as you can see, I like to use the 15cm gun on the E100. I used it in the last replay and this one, and that's just a personal preference. Whatever main gun you choose doesn't affect what secondary gun you have. You will still have the 75mm secondary gun. So I said that I was going to talk you through my commander and equipment setup, so I'll do that for you now. In terms of the commander, I run the same scales on both my E100 and MAUS commander, which are 6th Sense, Spawn Leader, Rapid Loading, Steady Aim, Rapid Aim, Snapshot, Situational Awareness, Pain Tolerance, and Track Mechanic. I run the Track Mechanic and the Pain Tolerance to get a 20% decreased chance of crew injury, and also just to get my trucks on 25% faster, making sure I can get angled up quicker and use my armour effectively. Some gun handling perks, situational awareness to help my view range, and rapid loading to help my DPM. I do run slightly different equipment on both the MAUS and the E100. So on the MAUS I run spool liner, advanced loader and gun stabilizer. I run the spool liner because I feel like the MAUS's sort of party trick is that 3000 hit points and its armor, whereas the E100 has the 15cm gun and the higher alpha damage, and I feel like the MAUS is just the sort of numero uno target for artillery, and I want to make sure I decrease my chances of taking damage from explosives and try and keep my crew in my tank. And whereas on the E100, in terms of the equipment, I run advanced loader, gun stabilizer and improved ventilation. I just want to improve my DPM a little bit more, and I don't run the spool liner. I want to try and improve my DPM with that 5% boost with the improved ventilation, because I use the 15cm gun to try and get these rounds out quicker, and it's just a way that I like to play both of the tanks. And if you want to have the same sort of gun handling you've seen in all of these replays and the same DPM, then that is the setup that I use. So here on Kasserine, where have I come to? Well, I've come to this centre, I don't know what you'd call it, centre road here, centre track, canyon maybe, and we're just going to brawl it out with all of the tanks that are down here. So this is a very good brawling location, but you do have to be careful. It's a hotbed for artillery and tank destroyers with high alpha damage and high penetration, and as you can see, we've already lost a substantial amount of damage. We did get lucky there with a shot. We fired at the T-110 Force Cupola. The Andre the Giant went, "Get down, Mr. President," and we shot the Andre the Giant's cupola instead, but we still dealt damage, and I'm happy with that. And as you can see here, we've been trying to make the secondary 75mm gun work there. However, we had to rely on our main 15cm gun to take out the T-54, but the 75mm gun will come in handy just that little bit later. Doing what I'm doing here, side scraping off of this rock, I am spotting up the tanks in front of me, so I do have a chance of getting some assistance. I will get shots in when they peek out. However, as you'll see, in most players will probably fire premium, especially when they see an E100 or MAUS, and that's perfectly fine. As you can see, I fire a lot of heat and I fire full APCR in the MAUS, so you can't blame that. If they see anyone at E100 with its flat armour and they want to penetrate it, they're more than likely going to fire premium, so you want to angle up as best you can and just hope you ricochet. But with the 15cm gun on the MAUS, it's all about trading, and you can do that effectively with that 750 alpha damage on the 15cm gun. I'm just having a little look behind me to see who's there and who's been taken out. We've picked up 2.1k damage. We have blocked 1100, which isn't too shabby for an E100. Sorry, the MAUS does block a lot better than the E100 due to the sort of slightly curved nature of the turret and just the thicker armor in general. We're going to try and shoot around there. And fortunately we had HE loaded to splash damage some of the tanks that are on low hit points down this little canyon or track down here, and we get an HE round into the side of that. I believe it was a poor tier 8 Swedish medium and do over 1000 damage, so that was a really pleasant thing. So the HE rounds on this 15cm are extremely useful for this kind of thing, for just doing a little bit of damage to take out low health targets and not having to rely on penetration. The HE rounds on the 75mm secondary gun wouldn't be enough to do any kind of damage to heavily armoured tanks. If they didn't have any armour, it might be an option, but you will see the 75mm gun come into action just a little bit later in this replay. So we're now up to 3.1k direct damage and 1870 blocked, and I just take a little blind fire there at that Ramsar Baltic. I was thinking that he might come out to the same position. Very stealthy tank, so there was no chance that we were going to spot him at this distance. And now we're going to try and go forth, and I'm expecting to get spotted by that Baltic sat up there in that location. I'm just going to try and wiggle and angle as I'm going forward. Unfortunately for me, I do run into some tanks there, and we sort of stay out in the open, so I do pre-aim there. I might have taken a shot because I was given my flat surface to the Ramator Borsig. I was hoping to get a shot in return. Fortunately, it was no penetration for him and no penetration for me, and we move forwards with just shy of 1,000 hit points, and it's a close game. We are 6 tanks on our team versus 7 on theirs, and I'm just going to try and be the difference here and try and get a kill here on a low health target, because I still have an HE round that I kept loaded for the Borsig, I should say. That Leopard 1 pops out, we get a shot going his way, but he gets taken out before we manage to get the shot off, and now we only have AP and heat rounds left, so I'm loading heat. It's a very stressful situation. I want to make sure that when I get a shot that it penetrates. We see this machine, and it's kind of not knowing where to go right at this moment. Where we are now is relatively safe from artillery, and we might get a shot into the back of this machine, so I'm trying to get as much height as possible. Of course, the E100 and the MAUS are both slow, so these kind of situations can be frustrating, but we get a shot there into the back of the machine. We spot up that medium at the back, and we get a kill and some assistance on that Progetto 65. And I think in terms of the secondary guns in all of these replays, you've seen that there are some circumstances when it can be useful, but they are few and far between. It's kind of a little niche thing that you can add to it. Here we auto-aim at the wwI, which was a terrible idea. That has an E100 hole. I was never going to go through that at that angle at the upper plate. And now you're seeing how poor the penetration is on the secondary rounds with a 75mm gun. However, the wwI fortunately only splashes us and leaves us on 190 hit points, and we managed to take him out with our subsequent main 15cm shell into the superstructure there, which we could penetrate. So yeah, that's a lesson for you. Auto aiming is bad. It can be useful in some circumstances, but don't rely on it. When you see artillery straight away, if it's the GW100, it's got an E100 hole, and you will bounce off of it. So now we're going forward, we're angling up to bounce a shell from this Ramator Borsig, and he does escape with his life. So we're going to try and get forwards as quickly as possible to get under his gun line, meaning he's going to have to overexpose to shoot us, and hopefully we can get within 50 meters to proximity spot this Borsig and help our teammates out. And they are fighting the light tank and the tank destroyer that are in the platoon over in the center of the map. The EBR-105 gets taken out, which is always good news, especially for a slow lumbering tank like the E100 or the MAUS. And the Taran, which is the OP $100 tank, or whatever you want to call it, that gets taken out as well by the T95 Chieftain. And now it's just this Ramator Borsig, and we're going to get a shell into the tracks of this Ramator Borsig, and now we're going to switch to our secondary gun, and this is the perfect demonstration of when it can be useful. So we managed to get that kill because of that secondary gun. We managed to get 3 shots in and finish that Borsig off, and we might have had to relocate should we not have killed him with our first round. So that does prove that it can be a useful addition on these tanks, but yeah, not all the time. So in that game we pick up 4.8k direct damage, 477 assistance block, 3.3k damage, and get 5 kills. So a very nice result in the E100. So all in all, I think that these are little niche additions. They're not going to be game changing, but they can be useful if you sort of use it in the right circumstance. But don't be lulled into using it all the time, because it can give your position away, and it can mean that your attention is elsewhere and you're not angling correctly in the super heavy tank. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this little look at the multiple weapon system in World War II, and I'll try and have a look at the other tanks that have this system added to and put a video out in the near future. But for now, I hope you're all having a great weekend, and I'll see you on the battlefield, and bye for now.